The thing about Andrew and what made him so successful is that he really captured the wonky politicos with a great idea. Much like Bernie was able to capture the nation with Medicare for all, Andrew's UBI was really what defined him, and it was smart. He had a plethora of things if you looked at his website, but he hammered that idea and made sure to repeat it over and over again. What is it going to take to make UBI palatable to the MSNBC, CNN, even Fox News crowd, if you will? I personally look at it as just calling it Social Security for all, but maybe you have a better idea that might work in terms of bringing more people into the fold.
Or what's worked in other places that is, an easier sell to the more libertarian crowd.
Yeah, so there isn't like one, say, most popular way that works with everyone. I think Social Security for all is certainly a way of reaching certain groups of people and explaining that, hey, all this is just, say, Social Security for dropping the age down from 65 to say 18 or something.
Yeah.
Like that is a helpful way of understanding what this is. But also Andrew said often that he did do some testing and he found that, freedom dividend worked well because, he's aiming for universality. A dividend works well to understand why everyone should receive it. So that it did the job. But also I think there's other ways. I prefer referring to it as unconditional basic income because I do that personally because unconditional, I think, is the most important element of the elements I described of what it is. And I feel that personally as having a crowdfunded basic income, that unconditional is important. But also I see that over and over again from pilots. I've seen this in the Finland experiment showed this, Namibia, India, there's always someone who, if you ask them what's most important now that you've experienced this, and they describe the unconditionality, they didn't have to do anything for it. They didn't have to prove anything. It was just there. And once something is there, and that's it. I think that's just really important. So I stress that. But also, if you're going to reach conservatives, I think that they need to understand it as a big national monthly tax rebate, or a refund or a credit.
Then you have to talk in taxation terms. They like everything in fiscal taxation terms, and they need to know that somehow they are not personally paying for someone else. They need to see it in a
Which, to the credit of the conservative side, they tend to be very policy oriented. I'm not talking about necessarily the elected GOP per se, but in terms of the actual voting blocks, policy is a very important thing. And anytime you can show somebody how it benefits them in their wallet, that's usually how you get their attention.
Yeah, and it's individuals, if they can understand that they get something. And so again, that's where the universality comes from in the importance, is that you have to assume that you're going to be a net beneficiary of this. And if you assume that you are just going to be paying higher taxes for it, then you're more likely to be like, well, I don't want that. But if you're like, well, I'm included, I get this too, then you're more likely to support it. And then that's why universal programs are just more supported in general. Social Security is a strong program because everyone thinks, well, when I reach that age, I will get it too. It's not only for them. It's also, I think, why the Alaska dividend has been so popular for so many years. I mean, everyone in Alaska has received a UBI since 1982. And I don't think it would have been as popular if they had decided back in 1982 to say, oh, it only goes to those earning under $75,000 the previous year.
Well, I love the way they premised it there. The premise of it is that it's based on them getting a dividend from their joint property and what they own in terms of the resources. And I think that's the way that we frame it in terms of, this is our combined resources of this country that we all should be sharing in. And let's face it, we don't. The pipelines that are going through are poisoning our water sources. We're not getting any sort of dividend from those profits of the oil that's being put through our land. So I think if we look at it dividend, we're investors in and that should be, or we should be getting dividends on that. I think that's a smart way to do it.
Yeah. Another thing too about Alaska is, they see it as a right. It's their right, it's their ownership right And they also see it as essentially their natural inheritance. And that goes back to Thomas Paine's argument of natural inheritance, where he described that, everyone upon reaching the age of 21 should receive the same capital grant as everybody else. And he saw that his reasoning for it was, well, okay, we created civilization through private property. And in doing so, we actually made some people worse off at the same time as making a lot of people better off. And so if you're going to actually prohibit access to the land, then you actually have to compensate people for that loss of access. So we were all the dispossessed of our natural inheritance. And that's where he saw it as a right and not charity. So I think that it's important that we too see it that way. It's just as true that we, can't live off the land. We can't just like find some spot and just like do work on our own and survive. Like, we are prohibited from doing that. So as long as we're prohibited, then we should actually see it as a right to that survival income, as being a right that has been taken from us. And also, it not only is a natural inheritance right, but again, we should see it as a technological inheritance right too. This is, all of humanity is just building up of generation after generation upon the previous generations. And we're very fortunate that we're born in this time right now, when all this technology exists as it is. And it doesn't make any sense for someone to just, be born now and like become a multi-billionaire,
right,
as if they could have done that 100 years ago. Like, they couldn't have done that. The technology didn't exist. So we should see it as humanity goes forward, then we should always have some sharing of that, previous body of knowledge that only existed thanks to those ancestors. And going forward, it just makes more and more sense to have that technological inheritance, as the dividend, especially as we're the ones also creating all the data that together even makes it more technology possible that would otherwise be not possible.
I think Andrew running for mayor in New York right now couldn't have come at a better time, considering all of the, Cuomo has completely botched. You want to talk about DeSantis down here in Florida. Cuomo has completely botched handling COVID. It is spreading again like crazy, and evictions are, ramping up in New York. UBI would be a game changer potentially for hundreds of thousands of people in New York City. And if you could speak to that, because unfortunately, Andrew's the only one who really is a known commodity right now who is pushing UBI, but New York City is probably as good a place as any, considering the wealth gap that exists. I'm from New Jersey, I know it well. So if you could speak more to that, I think that'd be very, very important.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see just how Yang runs the campaign there, and how people react to that. There's definitely a different New York now than there was, like, let's say if Yang had run last year. And suddenly so many people, like you said, they're facing eviction. They've experienced
New
food
York.
bank lines. Yeah. And not only that, but they've experienced our safety net for what it is. They've applied for unemployment for the first time. They've discovered that you have to maybe call back for 2 weeks. It may have required that, maybe you actually get like through the process, but then like you were waiting months and you still haven't gotten your first check. Like, there's over a million people right now in America who have been unemployed this entire time since March, and have been, waiting since March for their first unemployment check, and they still haven't gotten it. So in New York, there's a lot of people who've experienced all of this for the first time. And I think they're very open in a way that they weren't before to hearing about, oh, I can actually just rely on, say, $1,000 per month going forward. Like, that would just change everything. And also, like, there's certainly some really interesting funding opportunities to, or say, how to apply taxation in New York in a way that could work really well. And I don't know what Andrew's thinking in regards to just what he's going to announce, and if it's going to be, say, a pilot, or even like an actual program for basic income in New York. I don't know, but it is interesting to consider the various means that New York makes possible that maybe be more difficult elsewhere. So let's say, a land value tax, I think would be really interesting to see in New York City, because there's just immense land value that is even, it's being treated as investments from people overseas. And,
Yep.
where is the tax money for that? How is it that all this public infrastructure and all these investments going in benefit the owners of land instead of, renters? Like, that's another thing about traditional taxation in infrastructure, is that whenever you do that, you're actually kind of hurting renters, because you're going to have the prices go up, and the owners of the property are going to be the windfall beneficiaries. So if you apply a land value tax, which is taxed on the unimproved value of land, so they're not taxed on the buildings or the skyscrapers, they're taxed on the actual value of the land itself, and you do that, on a monthly basis or whatever, then you can actually really make sure that everyone in New York benefits from this vast wealth inequality in New York.
Yeah, it's getting dividends off the land in your collective city. And I think that, this is, a lot of times I find it's very frustrating because everybody is so concerned with their rights and nobody's concerned with their responsibilities. And I just think that, people have to realize that we are only better off with a healthy and educated population around us, and that we're not going to have that when our minimum security level is living in the street. Like that's just not going to work in our best interest. And COVID is that's just exacerbating a situation that was already, I think, pathetic. So, I mean, I think if anything, it offers us an opportunity, like what you were saying, to say this is an opportunity for this to really work.
Yeah, and another thing too that first of all, I was happy to see it, and also I was very frustrated to see the response to the visible evidence. But the fact that we provided a $1,200 stimulus check back, in April, and that we also did a $600 per week boost to unemployment insurance. That was $2,400 per month for people who were qualified and who got that also through pandemic unemployment assistance. That was for, a new program for gig workers, which was interesting because here we'd ignored them the entire time as being included from the safety net. And suddenly we're like, oh, let's go ahead and get money to them too. It's like, well, great, but like you were ignoring them before. But anyways, all this money, this boost went up to the point where 2 out of 3 of the unemployed were actually seeing an increase in their income, even after they are unemployed. And so you had conservatives who were like, oh, that's wrong. We're paying people not to work. They're not going back to work, blah, blah, blah. The evidence showed that it didn't have that effect, that there was no work disincentive, even with a $2,400 per month boost, that there was no work disincentive. But also that amount of income boosted consumption, and therefore it created jobs and it prevented jobs from being lost that otherwise would have been lost. And so I was upset with the fact that Republicans didn't use that. They didn't say, hey, this is we need to make sure that there are customers. We need to make sure that people have money to be customers.
So I say it all the
time. They talk about small business and how they love small business and how important small businesses are. Well, if you really do feel that way, then you have to make sure that there's businesses have customers and that those customers have money to spend. And so that's something that I think that this situation and the pandemic really leads into, is that, look, if we want to, even after the vaccine is out there and is distributed and we consider this kind of over, we still have a recession to get out of that's going to be around for a while unless we invest in the spending that makes it possible to grow out of it. And so that's why you have economists saying, look, we need to spend at least $5 trillion in the next 2 years in order to actually accelerate out of this recession, or else we're going to be, essentially losing that money. So we have to spend that much in order to avoid losing more than that. And so, that's what UBI is. It enables people to spend in the economy, that grows the economy. And we have this, what Yang referred to as a trickle up economy. I like to say it's grow up economics, because it's time for economics to grow up, and that we need to make sure that people have that spending. And that's also, anecdotes are so powerful. So I just want to share this real quick anecdote from the Namibia UBI pilot. And so there was a woman there who was very successful, who was the most successful example. The first thing that she did with her first payment was she went out and she got She got flour, she got yeast, and she made like a little makeshift oven. And she started baking these like small baked goods for her village. And she succeeded to the point where she earned so much more money on top of her basic income from her new business. And so people will look at that and go, oh, like how great it is that she did that. Well, imagine if she'd only gotten a loan. So she would have done the exact same thing, but who would have bought her stuff? Like no one in her village could have really been able to afford it. The reason she was successful was because she was in a village that had UBI. So then everyone in her village had the money and they all, wanted her bread and they were able to pay for her bread. So that's really the thing, is it's not only about making sure that capital gets to the hands of people who want to start businesses and open them, but if we want them to succeed, we have to make sure that they exist in an environment where people have money to spend.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.